Emily Carter and Victor Hale, two names that began as a whispered romance in a quiet town, would soon be etched into history for one of the most disturbing and unforgivable crimes a mother could commit. In the quiet town of Greenwood, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. People knew each other's names, their routines, and even the small details of their daily lives. Emily Carter blended seamlessly into this backdrop. At just 26 years old, she was a single mother raising her 6-month-old daughter, Lily, in a modest rented apartment above a bakery. To those who saw her pushing a stroller down the sunlit streets or picking up groceries at the corner store, she seemed like the picture of a young mother trying her best. She worked part-time at a small cafe on Main Street, where regulars often praised her friendly smile and soft-spoken nature. Yet, beneath that gentle exterior, Emily carried a loneliness that no one in Greenwood suspected. Her relationship with Lily's father had ended abruptly during her pregnancy, leaving her to navigate motherhood alone. The days were long and often exhausting, but Emily tried to appear strong in front of others. When neighbors asked how she was doing, she would respond with a polite nod and a short answer, never letting on that she spent many nights sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the peeling wallpaper, wondering how her life had narrowed into a cycle of bottles, diapers, and bills she could barely pay. It was during one of these late evenings that she first encountered Victor Hale. Victor was unlike anyone Emily had ever known. He had an air of danger about him, all lean, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. He arrived in Greenwood as if he had stepped out of a different world, one filled with movement, unpredictability, and risk. He came into the cafe one afternoon, ordered black coffee, and struck up a conversation that left Emily flustered but strangely intrigued. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular customer, often waiting until her shift ended to walk her home. Soon, Emily found herself confiding in him, sharing her frustrations, her fears, and her longing for a life beyond Greenwood. Victor listened intently, but he also began to plant seeds of possibility in her mind. He spoke of places he had traveled, people he had met, and the rush of living without rules. To Emily, his stories sounded like freedom. For the first time in months, she felt noticed, desired, and important. She began rearranging her life in small ways to make time for him, asking her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Davenport, to watch Lily more often, slipping away for late night drives with Victor, and letting his compliments drown out the nagging guilt she felt when she wasn't home. With each passing week, Emily's attachment to Victor deepened. She started to see him as the key to escaping the limitations of her life. The crying baby, the endless chores, the financial strain, all of it began to feel like heavy chains holding her back. In contrast, Victor seemed like a door to a world of passion and excitement. What Emily didn't realize was that the door she longed to step through would soon lead her into darkness so deep there would be no way back. Victor's presence in Emily's life quickly shifted from thrilling to consuming. At first, he was a distraction, a burst of excitement that brightened her otherwise repetitive days. But soon, he became the center of her world. His late-night texts, his sudden appearances outside her apartment, and his constant need for her attention began to shape her decisions. She found herself looking forward to their secret meetings more than the quiet moments with Lily. The baby's cries started to irritate her in a way they never had before, interrupting the fantasies Victor fed her about escaping Greenwood and starting over somewhere far away. Victor's influence was subtle at first. He never directly insulted Lily, but he would make comments that lodged themselves in Emily's mind. He would joke about how a kid changes everything, or how real freedom means no strings attached. Each time, he would smile as if he were only teasing, but the message was always clear. Their relationship would never be truly free as long as Lily was part of Emily's life. He began comparing her to other women he claimed to have known, women who, according to him, had made sacrifices. For the men they loved, Emily would laugh off his remarks in the moment, but later, lying awake in bed, they would replay in her mind, filling her with a sense of inadequacy. When they were together, Victor made her feel like the most important person in the room. He spoke in ways that made her believe they were destined for each other, that theirs was a love strong enough to break any boundary. but with every expression of affection came another layer of pressure. He painted an enticing picture of a life on the road, of small towns and city skylines, of never having to answer to anyone. Yet there was always an unspoken condition, that life could only exist without the responsibilities tying Emily down. Emily started making more excuses to be away from home. Mrs. Davenport became Lily's default caretaker for hours at a time, while Emily disappeared with Victor. They would drive down empty highways, music blaring, stopping at roadside diners and motels. In those moments, Emily convinced herself that she could live like this forever, that the chaos of her home life was just temporary. She began to resent the routine she had once tried so hard to maintain. The bottle feedings, the midnight whey, cups, the never-ending laundry, they all seemed like obstacles keeping her from the life Victor promised. Victor sensed the shift in her thinking and leaned into it. His stories grew darker, his expectations bolder. He hinted that the only way they could truly be together was if she proved her loyalty in a way that no one could question. He spoke about commitment as though it required a grand, irreversible act, something that would show she was willing to put him first above all else. Emily didn't know it then, but the seeds of destruction had already been planted, and they were beginning to take root in a place she thought was beyond corruption. The night the horror unfolded began with a heavy rain that seemed to muffle the world outside. Emily stood in her small kitchen, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. A large pot sat on the stove, water slowly heating as she prepared a simple dinner. Lily was asleep in a crib in the next room, her soft breaths just barely audible over the low hum of the refrigerator. Emily's mind was far away, drifting through the promises Victor had made, the places they would go, the new life that awaited them once they were free. When Victor arrived, he was soaked from the rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His presence filled the tiny apartment like a storm breaking through the door. There was no casual conversation, no lingering kisses like before. His mood was different, intense, almost impatient. He watched her for a long moment, his gaze fixed, before speaking in a voice that left no room for doubt. He told her it was time to prove herself, to show that nothing mattered to her more than him. The words landed with the weight of inevitability, as though this moment had been coming all along. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what he meant even before he said it outright. A wave of nausea rolled over her, but Victor's stare held her in place. In her mind, she heard every conversation they had ever shared about freedom, about shedding the past, about sacrifice. It all twisted together into a single, awful conclusion, that Lily was the chain holding her back from the life she wanted. The part of her that had once resisted was drowning beneath the pressure of his expectations and her own desperate need for his approval. Her movements felt mechanical as she walked to Lily's crib. The baby stirred, blinking up at her with trusting eyes. Emily lifted her gently, holding her close for a moment that felt like it could shatter her. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence as she carried Lily into the kitchen. The pot on the stove was now boiling, steam curling upward in ghostly tendrils. Victor stood nearby, unmoving, his eyes never leaving her. What happened next seemed to stretch and compress all at once, every second vivid, every sound magnified, the hiss of the boiling water, the faint whimper from Lily, the pounding of Emily's heart. There was no screaming, no sudden outburst, just a terrible, suffocating quiet once it was over. Steam clouded the room, clinging to her skin, mingling with the sharp scent of metal and heat. Her hands trembled violently, her breathing ragged, but Victor's face remained calm, almost pleased. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her immediately, but there was no comfort, no undoing. Victor stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder as if sealing a pact. In that moment, Emily understood that the life she had destroyed was not only Lily's, it was her own. The morning after the killing, Greenwood seemed unchanged to the outside world. The streets were still slick from the night's rain, the bakery downstairs opened on time, and neighbors went about their routines. But inside Emily's apartment, the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves knew the truth. She moved mechanically, her face pale, eyes hollow. She told herself she needed to act quickly, to control the story before anyone began asking questions. She claimed that Lily had died suddenly during the night, and that she wanted to handle things quietly. Within hours, she contacted a local crematorium, insisting on an immediate service. Her haste drew the first flickers of suspicion. The coroner, Dr. Harris, was puzzled when he received the death report. The lack of medical examination, combined with Emily's refusal to allow an autopsy, didn't sit right. He had handled enough infant cases to know that sudden deaths in otherwise healthy babies were rare and always deserved closer investigation. When he called Emily to request more details, her answers were clipped and inconsistent. She couldn't seem to remember exactly what time she had found Lily or what position she was in. Meanwhile, Mrs. Davenport, the elderly neighbor who often cared for Lily, began to notice changes in Emily's behavior. The young mother seemed more agitated than grief, stricken, avoiding eye contact and keeping her apartment door locked at all times. One afternoon, Mrs. Davenport confided in another neighbor that she had heard strange sounds coming from Emily's kitchen the previous night. Muffled noises, followed by what she described as an odd, sharp smell, drifting through the hallway. That rumor spread quickly, eventually reaching the ears of Detective Alan Reeves, a seasoned investigator with the Greenwood Police Department. Reeves requested entry into Emily's apartment under the pretense of following up on the death report. While Emily tried to appear cooperative, her nervous glances toward the kitchen caught his attention. On the stove, a large pot sat in the sink, recently scrubbed but faint traces of residue clinging to its surface. The detective noted it but said nothing, quietly collecting the information for later. Later that week, Reeves received a tip about Victor Hale. A quick background check revealed a troubling history: multiple arrests for theft, assault, and suspected involvement in the disappearance of a woman in another town. Witnesses confirmed seeing Victor coming and going from Emily's apartment in the weeks leading up to Lily's death. That detail, combined with the neighbor's account and the coroner's unease, gave Reeves enough reason to push for a deeper investigation. A forensic team was brought in discreetly. They recovered traces from the pot that suggested exposure to high heat and organic material inconsistent with normal cooking. The findings pointed to something far more sinister than a peaceful passing in the night. As the walls of her carefully constructed lie began to close in, Emily felt the first true pangs of fear, not for Lily, whose fate was already sealed, but for herself. She began to realize that Victor's promises would not shield her from the truth that was steadily unraveling around her. Emily's arrest came quietly, without the flashing lights or dramatic scenes she had imagined in her nightmares. Detective Reeves and 2 officers arrived at her apartment in the early morning, their knock firm but calm. She opened the door wearing the same faded sweater she had slept in, her hair unkempt, eyes rimmed red. They informed her she was being taken in for questioning regarding Lily's death. Victor's name was mentioned, and she froze for the briefest moment, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she tried to compose herself. At the station, Reeves kept his tone steady, methodical. He presented the inconsistencies in her statements, the neighbor's testimony, and the forensic evidence from the pot. Emily denied everything at first, insisting Lily had died in her sleep, and that her actions were simply those of a grieving mother trying to move on quickly. But as the hours passed, her resolve began to crumble. Reeves shifted the conversation toward Victor, asking about his influence and what promises he had made. Each time Victor's name surfaced, Emily's voice grew softer, her eyes darting to the floor. When Reeves mentioned that Victor had disappeared, Emily's breathing quickened. She had expected him to be at her side through all of this, to shield her from the consequences. The reality that he had abandoned her without hesitation landed like a physical blow. Alone in the interrogation room, with the weight of her actions pressing in, she finally began to speak. The words came haltingly at first, then faster, as if the truth had been waiting to escape. She admitted that Victor had told her they could only be together if Lily was gone. She confessed to carrying her daughter into the kitchen that night, to the boiling water, to the silence that followed. The confession shocked even the most seasoned officers in the department. Though Reeves had suspected Victor's involvement, Hearing Emily describe the act in her own words made the crime's brutality all the more real. She didn't cry as she spoke. Instead, she seemed hollow, as if the part of her capable of feeling had been burned away with her child. In court, the prosecution painted Emily as a woman consumed by obsession, willing to sacrifice her own flesh and blood for the illusion of love. Victor was labeled a manipulative predator, but without his presence, the focus remained squarely on Emily. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning with a guilty verdict. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Victor Hale, despite an extensive manhunt, was never found. Rumors placed him in different states, even in another country, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. For the people of Greenwood, the case left a scar that would never fully heal. The thought that a mother could choose a lover over her child, in such a cruel and irreversible way, haunted the community. In the years that followed, Emily's name became a chilling reminder of how love twisted into obsession can destroy more than just the one it targets. It can devour everything in its path.